President Trump's metals tariffs kicked in at midnight. The U.S. administration has imposed 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, with no exceptions or exemptions for Canada or any of America's trading partners. The European Union is launching retaliatory countermeasures. The bloc plans to impose its own levies on around $28 billion worth of American goods. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen laid out the bloc's plans earlier.
Our countermeasures will be introduced in 2 steps, starting with April 1st and fully in place as of April 13th. In the meantime, we will always remain open to negotiations. We firmly believe that in a world fraught with geo-economic and political uncertainties, it is not in our common interest to burden our economies with such tariffs.
Let's say with those tariffs, because joining us now, we have Bloomberg metals and mining reporter Deaux. Joe, it was great to have you with us when the news broke about potential 50% tariffs yesterday. Now that we finally have some clarity, take us into your reporting. When you called up executives yesterday, what did those conversations sound like?
So initially, when the president announced he was going to double the tariffs on Canada, I spoke to multiple people in the market who are actually supportive of tariffs, basically shrugging, saying, I don't know where this came from. I don't know how we got here. This is a bit confusing. Because remember, these are still businesses. They still like to have certainty to plan for. Mm-hmm. I do want to throw out one thing I remember from 2018. By the end of 2018, I was going to steel conferences and talking to executives of big steel companies, of re-rollers, everybody in the market. And they said, you know what we need from the president is for him to just make a darn decision. Because you might remember back then he was talking about exemptions, no exemptions, who he liked, who he didn't like. And they said, just make a call. If it's no tariffs, that's fine. If it's tariffs, that's good too. But our customers need certainty. And I think that's what we're going to start seeing here, right now.
I totally hear you. And it's interesting. We have Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, speaking on Fox right now. And he says they will lower the temperature with Canada. And the world is watching, right? The way that the U.S. negotiates with Canada. 50% to 25%. While I hear you on the certainty, that's gotta be some relief. You almost wonder whether he said the 50s so that everyone would get comfortable with the 25.
Well, by the way, I mean, how does nobody you got to give credit to him for that win, right? Everybody's like, Trump backtracked, Trump retreated. He got Ontario to take off a 25% tax on energy exports. Someone's got to give him a little credit for that, right?
I don't know if anyone has to give him credit or if they have to give him full credit, but I do know that talking to service centers in the space yesterday, they said, listen, whatever happens, the ultimate person who's going to pay for these tariffs are consumers. And they're going to pay for it at a time when demand is weak, inflation is high, and borrowing rates remain high. As I mentioned yesterday, steel inventories across this country are at the highest in years. And now you're adding 25% more price on top of what they're already not paying. And this was one other thing that a service center person told me yesterday was, you're asking the consumers to pay more, and yet they're not buying.
It is interesting about the payee, right? Because Warren Buffett said on CBS last week, it's not the tooth fairy that's going to pay these, right? He also said tariffs are an act of war, which I think was fascinating, especially if you put that together with Ray Dalio's comments.
Well, you've heard the phrasing from the Trump administration that this isn't a trade war, it's a drug war. But to your point that there's been this narrative that these tariffs are being used as negotiating tactics. So spin this forward for us, because you write in Bloomberg News today about, there's calls now for more talks. What does that look like?
I think I go back to what was initially discussed across Washington, D.C., from major sources within the steel industry going back to November 7th, right, the day after the election. And what had become apparent to me, talking to different folks across this, they said what's going to happen is he's going to go all in on the tariffs, specifically aluminum and steel. It's going to happen. And once they go into effect, he'll negotiate backwards. Now, listen, I don't think any of them expected the kind of back and forth that we have seen for the past 2 months, right? On a Friday, we're going to do this, but on a Monday, no, we're not going to actually do it. But I do think we have gotten to the point where these tariffs have come in place for steel and aluminum, 25% steel, which we had before, 25% aluminum, that's much higher. But there is obviously still room for discussions. We do know, we have reporting that said that there was a lot of lobbying efforts going on in the past 2 weeks by the aluminum industry. We knew that the CEO of Alcoa was sitting in a room with Howard Lutnick and others. Rio Tinto representatives were there. The head of the United States Aluminum Association saying, you guys need to get rid of the Canada-specific tariffs. And listen, they're having the meetings. Does it mean something will actually get done? I don't know. But we do know the conversations are happening, and maybe there is some relief for markets to hear that these conversations are occurring and that there's hope that it could be down the road.